Boa noite, sejam muito bem-vindos e bem-vindas ao webinário de lançamento do livro Jardim de Infância para a Vida Toda, por uma aprendizagem criativa, mão na massa e relevante para todos, do autor Mitchell Resnick, que é professor e pesquisador do MIT Media Lab. Eu sou Marina Lopes, repórter do Porvir, e gostaria de dar as boas-vindas a todos vocês ao nosso webinar, que é organizado pelo Porvir, em parceria com a Rede Brasileira de Aprendizagem Criativa, com apoio de Fundação Lehman, Hub Educacional, Faber-Castell e Penso. Antes de começar a nossa conversa, eu tenho alguns recados importantes para todos vocês que estão nos acompanhando. O nosso convidado principal dessa transmissão é norte-americano, então ele vai responder as nossas questões em inglês, a sua língua nativa. Então, para que todos possam entender a conversa e participar, está presente no nosso webinário o Walter Stella, que vai traduzir tudo o que falaremos por aqui. Por isso, se você se inscreveu e está acompanhando pelo Zoom, você deve escolher o canal em português ou em inglês para acompanhar a nossa conversa. Para fazer isso, você pode consultar a barra de baixo, tem um globinho. Se vocês clicarem em cima dele, vocês podem selecionar a língua de preferência. Se vocês escolherem inglês, vocês vão ouvir toda a nossa conversa em inglês, e se escolherem português, vão ouvir toda a nossa conversa em português, ok? Quem está acompanhando pelo YouTube do Porvir também vai ter acesso a essa conversa em português com tradução. Quem quiser mandar perguntas ao longo do nosso webinário, pode encaminhar pelo chat do Zoom ou pelo YouTube. Nós vamos filtrar as perguntas e vamos encaminhar para o Mitchell. Eu sei que muitos de vocês que estão acompanhando a nossa transmissão já estão ansiosos, vocês já conhecem as ideias e o trabalho do Mitchell. Eu também estou com muita expectativa para ouvi-lo nessa noite. Mas acreditamos que algumas pessoas que estão aqui ainda não tiveram a oportunidade de conhecer muito a fundo o trabalho do Mitchell, gostariam mais de entender sobre o trabalho dele, a relevância dele para o Brasil, para a educação. Por isso, para apresentá-lo, eu vou convidar a Carolina Rodegueiro, que é pesquisadora do grupo do Mitchell no MIT, e ela é coordenadora pedagógica da Rede Brasileira de Aprendizagem Criativa. Ela vai apresentar o Mitchell para a gente aqui e também vai conduzir um pouco dessa conversa junto com a gente. Carol, muito bem-vinda a esse webinário. E, por favor, conta para a gente um pouquinho por que conversar com essa nossa conversa com o Mitchell vai ser tão especial para a comunidade brasileira e também por que nós devemos comemorar o lançamento do livro dele no Brasil.
Boa noite, Marina. Boa noite a todos. Gente, eu estou muito honrada de estar aqui nessa noite apresentando o autor de um livro que há tanto tempo nós aguardamos no Brasil. De norte ao sul do país, né, de leste a oeste, existe um movimento de pessoas que trabalham por uma educação mais significativa e acessível. São milhares de educadores, de professores, famílias, pesquisadores, empreendedores, artistas, cientistas, gestores, tomadores de decisão e tantos outros perfis que querem desenhar e implementar novas oportunidades para que crianças e jovens do Brasil cresçam em espaços educacionais que permitam a construção de projetos que são pessoalmente significativos, criados em colaboração com os pares e com muita liberdade para explorar criativamente, brincando. Nas diferentes regiões do país, torna-se cada vez mais comum que estudantes vão para a cozinha da escola inventar receitas para aprender sobre matemática, química, geografia, história. Jovens e crianças fotografarem a própria comunidade para aguçar esse senso de pertencimento cultural, ou ainda, né, que os alunos eles conectem materiais reutilizáveis a projetos computacionais. Também professores que unem as mesas da sala de aula para oportunizar a colaboração, que organizam festivais para acolher e celebrar a invenção e a criatividade dos alunos e que colaboram na formação de outros professores com oficinas, rodas de conversa e com muita troca de experiência. Esse movimento é a Rede Brasileira de Aprendizagem Criativa, que vem há 5 anos reunindo e construindo uma comunidade de prática para transformar a educação no nosso país. O livro Jardim de Infância para a Vida Toda aborda os princípios educacionais que sustentam esse trabalho no Brasil. O autor, a quem a gente recebe hoje, o professor Mitchell Resnick, é uma inspiração e é também a referência para o nosso trabalho enquanto rede e enquanto movimento. E a gente está muito feliz de recepcioná-lo nessa noite. O Mitchell trabalha no desenvolvimento de novas tecnologias e recursos para engajar as crianças e os jovens em experiências de aprendizagem criativa que causem impacto social. Ele é um professor no Instituto de Tecnologia de Massachusetts, o MIT, onde ele dirige o grupo Lifelong Kindergarten, que tem o mesmo nome do livro. O Mitchell, ele é cofundador da Clubhouse Network, uma rede de centro de aprendizagens comunitários para crianças e jovens de baixa renda, que hoje tem mais de 100 unidades no mundo inteiro. E ele trabalha em colaboração com a Lego há mais de 30 anos, desenvolvendo kits de robótica educacional e também colaborando em projetos que disseminam a aprendizagem criativa, principalmente pelo brincar. Talvez o seu projeto mais popular, principalmente entre as crianças, seja a plataforma de computação criativa Scratch, que tem mais de 56 milhões de projetos compartilhados online e é traduzida para mais de 40 idiomas, incluindo o português do Brasil. O Mitchell participou da idealização e a criação do Scratch e até hoje dirige esse projeto e a equipe que o desenvolve na Fundação Scratch nos Estados Unidos. A leitura que o Mitchell nos convida a fazer hoje percorre os princípios e a origem da aprendizagem criativa em uma narrativa super envolvente, que vocês vão amar, em parêntese, sobre conceitos e experiências do autor, de experiências do próprio Mitchell e de crianças e jovens que cresceram em ambientes de aprendizagem criativa na prática. O livro vai ser uma grande contribuição para o Brasil como a referência para o crescimento do movimento em construção de uma sociedade mais criativa, preparada para refletir e repensar o que é a escola nos dias de hoje. Vai nos inspirar a inovar, a buscar um futuro e também o presente mais interessante para as crianças e os jovens do nosso país. Gente, como leitora desse livro, pesquisadora, articuladora e uma sempre aprendiz da aprendizagem criativa, eu convido a todos a mergulharem no Jardim de Infância para a Vida Toda, refletindo bastante sobre cada capítulo. Quem sabe até organizando sessões de leitura e reflexão com os colegas, em clubes de leitura online. Eu desejo que o livro, assim como a conversa que eu vou ter com o Mitchell nessa noite, seja uma inspiração para transformarmos nossas ideias em prática e na experiência da aprendizagem criativa e transformadora do Brasil. Uma boa conversa e uma boa leitura a todos.
Muito obrigada, Carol, por trazer esse panorama para a gente. E agora sim, chegou o momento que todos estão com muita expectativa. Chegou a hora de ouvir o Mitchell, autor do livro Jardim de Infância para a Vida Toda, por uma aprendizagem criativa, mão na massa e relevante para todos. Estão todos convidados a participar da nossa conversa e uma boa conversa e uma boa discussão para a gente.
Bom, eu vou dar as boas-vindas, então, agora ao Mitchell. Boa noite, Mitchell. Nós estamos muito felizes, como eu falei, pela oportunidade de conversar contigo e celebrar o lançamento desse livro em português aqui no Brasil. Bom, para começar a conversa, vamos direto para o livro, né? No livro, você fala sobre estender a abordagem do jardim de infância para pessoas em todas as idades, né? Não só na educação infantil. Então, por que você acha que isso é tão importante?
Well, thanks so much for that very wonderful introduction, Carolina. It's great to be able to talk with the community in Brazil. And I want to thank the sponsors, Porvir and others who put together the webinar, and all of the other sponsors of the book, the Pencil Publishing Company, the Lemon Foundation, which has been a great supporter, and the Creative Learning Network you work with, which has just been a great collaborator. I've had wonderful experiences in my visits to Brazil, and I look forward to the time when I'll be able to come back again and meet directly with people. In my work, I've always been inspired by the way children learn in kindergarten. And when I think of the traditional kindergarten, I imagine a room full of children playfully creating things in collaboration with one another. In one corner of the room, children might be building a castle with wooden blocks and telling stories about the people who live in the castle. In another part of the room, children might be making pictures with finger paints and crayons. And in the process of doing these creative activities, children are developing as creative thinkers. They learn how to start with an idea and carry through to create something that they can share with others. And I think developing as a creative thinker is more important than anything else, and more important today than ever before. I think we all know that today's world is changing so rapidly. So we don't quite know what the world will be like as today's children grow up. So to prepare for tomorrow's world, what's most important is for children to develop as creative thinkers, to be able to act and think creatively, so they can come up with innovative solutions for the unexpected and unknown situations which they will confront in the future. So kindergarten gets children ready to be part of that journey, developing as creative thinkers, so they're ready for a society that will require creative thinking more than ever before. But there's a problem. After kindergarten, most schools become very different. Children, once they leave kindergarten, spend a lot of time sitting at their desks, filling out worksheets, listening to lectures. And of course, they learn certain facts this way, but they no longer continue to develop as creative thinkers. So most of schooling doesn't help children continue to develop the skills that they need to really succeed and be happy in this fast-changing world. And in fact, in many places, even kindergartens are starting to change. That in many kindergartens today, children are filling out math worksheets or drilling on phonics flashcards. So in many places, kindergarten is becoming more like the rest of school. What I think is important is to do exactly the opposite. We don't want kindergarten to become like the rest of school. We want the rest of school, and in fact, the rest of life, to become more like kindergarten. And that's what lifelong kindergarten is all about. And in the book, I try to look at what is special about the kindergarten approach and how can we extend that kindergarten approach to learners of all ages so that children of all ages will continue to develop as creative thinkers. And for me, I've identified 4 guiding principles that are part of the kindergarten approach to help children develop as creative thinkers. And those 4 guiding principles are projects, passion, peers, and play. Do we see that children do their most creative work and develop as creative thinkers when they're working on projects in collaboration with peers, based on their passions in a playful spirit. And this happens in most kindergartens, but too often those 4 Ps are missing. So a big part of the mission of our group at MIT and the message of the book is how can we help children continue to develop as creative thinkers by providing them with opportunities to work on projects based on their passions in collaboration with peers in a playful spirit.
Muito obrigada, Mitch. Acho que foi uma introdução maravilhosa em relação ao livro. E a gente tem curiosidade, assim, né? Então, como que você acabou se envolvendo com a aprendizagem criativa, pessoal e profissionalmente? E também, assim, se você consegue conectar o jardim de infância para a vida inteira e a aprendizagem criativa com experiências da tua própria infância.
Oh, I think I was very fortunate in my own childhood that I did have lots of opportunities to explore and experiment and to create things in a kindergarten style. I remember at home, I wasn't just playing games, I was always making up my own games. So I would make up games and make up sports that I would play with my brother and my sister and my cousins. So we were all doing these creative activities. I remember just recently, I was finding a photograph that I'd made in my childhood because I'd been given a dark room where I could make my own photographs. And I started making creative pictures with these photographs. I have hanging on the wall right over here an anniversary card that I made for my parents, where I took the photographs with my brother and my sister and made this creative card for my parents. So for me, those were some of the best learning experiences. I feel that I didn't get a lot of those experiences in school. a lot of those best learning experiences came outside of school with my brother and my sister and my friends and my cousins as we were able to work on projects together with one another, work on things we really cared about based on our interests. So I think that really helped get me started in that direction. It wasn't until after I graduated college that I realized how important that was. Because I think through school, I continued to do well in school, but I was mostly just learning how to take the tests and get good grades. But when I graduated, I realized that wasn't leading me to where I wanted to be. So I needed to start thinking, what's going to be meaningful to me? How am I going to be able to do something that's meaningful to me and to other people? And I started realizing the best way was to try to help others recreate those same type of childhood experiences where they would get to work on projects based on their passions in collaboration with peers in a playful spirit.
Mitch, você trabalhou com o professor Seymour Papert por muitos anos e hoje é professor Lego Papert no MIT. A gente adoraria ouvir um pouco sobre a sua história com Papert e qual a mensagem sobre o legado dele que você busca trazer para os projetos que desenvolve hoje.
So I feel very fortunate that I met Seymour Papert. It was in 1982 I met him. At the time, I was just a couple years out of college, and I was working as a journalist, writing about science and technology. I studied science in college, and I was writing about science. And I went to hear a talk that Seymour Papert gave, and I was so inspired by his talk. Right then, in 1982, was the very early days of the personal computer. So people were just starting to get available ways to interact with these low-cost computers. And Seymour had developed a programming language for children called Logo. And when I saw that children were able to write programs in Logo to create things on the computer, I found that very inspiring. But it wasn't, the technology is not what was most inspiring for me. Oftentimes, Seymour is identified as the creator of this first programming language for children, and it helps children learn mathematical ideas. But that's not the most important lesson that I took from Seymour. I was inspired by Seymour because of the way that he viewed children and treated children and the way that he viewed learning. That for Seymour, he was always focused on providing children with opportunities to live up to their full potential, to give them opportunities to follow their interests, to explore their ideas, to develop their voice, their way of expressing themselves. And to me, that felt like the way that we should treat children and the way that children would be best prepared for the future. It was the type of, he was giving an image of a society that I would want to live in. So although many people saw Seymour as a technologist developing this new programming language, for me, what was most important about Seymour was Seymour as an educator and as a way, as someone who really understood, what childhood was about and how we could help children live up to their potential and provide them with the opportunities they would need to lead full, joyful, and meaningful lives.
Bom, falando sobre alegria, sobre vidas significativas e relevantes, e sobre crianças, você é muito conhecido pelo trabalho com o Scratch. E aí a gente perguntou para algumas crianças aqui no Brasil, né, o que elas perguntariam, o que elas têm curiosidade para os criadores do Scratch, né, o que elas perguntariam ao criador do Scratch e aos co-criadores também. E a gente trouxe uma dessas perguntas aqui hoje. Então é o seguinte, Mitchell, como que vocês tiveram essa ideia genial? Muitos pontos de interrogação e exclamação.
And of course, all ideas build on lots of previous ideas. As I mentioned before, Seymour Papert had developed a programming language for children, Logo, and Scratch was inspired in many ways by Logo. But when I started working on Scratch about 20 years ago, I realized that there was something new that was needed. And I got a lot of my inspiration because I was working with children and teenagers at the time. So as you mentioned in the introduction, I helped start a network of after-school learning centers called Computer Clubhouses. This is a project I created with my colleague, Natalie Rusk. And Natalie created the first computer clubhouse where young people could come and use new technologies to explore and experiment and express themselves. And they set up the clubhouses in communities where children oftentimes didn't have many advantages. They didn't have many opportunities. So they were set up in low-income communities, and they were set up to provide children with new potential, new opportunities. And in the 1990s, as we worked with teenagers at these clubhouses, they were working on wonderful projects, creating images on the screen and creating music with the computer. But there were certain things that children wanted to do that they weren't able to do. We saw that children wanted to create their own interactive games and interactive stories, and there wasn't the right software to enable them to do that. Because to do that, you would need to learn traditional programming languages like Java or C++, and the children and teenagers at the clubhouse were not going to be learning those languages, but they really wanted to create their own stories and games and animations. So we created Scratch in order to satisfy the needs of those children at the clubhouses, to let them follow their interests, to let them create the things that they wanted to create. So we took our inspiration from their imaginations, and we talked to the children, and we worked with them, and we saw what do they want to create, and how can we create a new software that would enable them to do that. And we were inspired by the Logo language. We need to enhance it in many ways to live up to the dreams of children with the newer technology in the year 2000 and beyond. So we started work on Scratch, and throughout the whole process of developing it, we worked with children in the clubhouses to get their feedback and their advice, and we kept modifying it and changing it so to make sure that children could do and create the things that they really wanted to create. And we saw that children wanted to share their ideas with one another and to build on each other's ideas. So we knew it couldn't just be a programming language, but we also made it a community where children could create games and stories and animations, but then share their creations with one another in an online community. So we saw Scratch as a way for children to work on projects based on passions and collaboration with peers in a playful spirit. So it was a creative learning experience that enabled children to take their dreams and make them turn into realities.
Muito obrigada por isso. Eu já ia perguntar, né, tá, e como que a aprendizagem criativa está relacionada com o Scratch, mas você já trouxesse todo, acho que ela esteve relacionada desde o princípio do Scratch, né? Só para um comentário, assim, aqui no Brasil, principalmente quem trabalha com Scratch e aprendizagem criativa, existe sempre essa discussão, assim, né, como que a gente apresenta o Scratch, como que a gente chama, o que é o Scratch, né? E no início eu falei, uma plataforma de computação criativa, e geralmente eu acabo usando isso porque muita gente não... se a gente diz, né, que é um ambiente de aprendizagem, de criação, expressão pessoal, e não fala da parte de programação, talvez o pessoal não entenda que isso está ligado à computação de alguma forma. Mas eu acho tão bonito a forma como essa discussão em torno do Scratch com a aprendizagem criativa, ela leva sempre para o lado dos P's, né, dos projetos com paixão, por meio de pares e compensar o brincando. E eu fico feliz que essa abordagem assim, está cada vez mais relacionada ao Scratch aqui no Brasil também, né? Bom, vamos lá, né? A gente está falando um pouquinho de Scratch, de computação, né? Contaste muito da história do Logo, relacionamento com o Papert. E tem uma pergunta que eu acho que todo mundo gosta de refletir bastante aqui no Brasil, né? Que é em relação à importância da tecnologia para a aprendizagem criativa, né? Então, até que ponto, qual a importância, né, da tecnologia para a aprendizagem criativa e até que ponto a aprendizagem criativa depende de tecnologia, Mitchell?
First of all, it's important to emphasize that there are many ways to engage in creative learning experiences without advanced technology. And when children grow up and they make a sandcastle, that's a type of creative learning. When they paint a picture, that's a type of creative learning. So those traditional activities of childhood, there are many ways for children to express themselves creatively and develop as creative thinkers. Now, of course, sometimes they're using things that don't feel like technology, but of course, they really were technologies at one point. When children draw with a paintbrush, well, the paintbrush at one point was a new technology a few hundred years ago. Now it feels like an ordinary, object. Or when they draw with a crayon, it feels like an everyday craft object, but it was a new technology at one point. So I think we're always trying to develop new types of ways for children to design and create and express themselves. Some of the technologies, or some things that used to be new technologies like paintbrushes and crayons, now become everyday objects. I think with computers and with Scratch, we're expanding the range of what people can create. Children can already create many things with paintbrushes and modeling clay and wooden blocks. But Scratch expands the range of what they can create. And in the process, it expands the range of what they can learn. With a lot of traditional materials, like wooden blocks and paintbrushes, children can build static sculptures. They can make pictures and static structures. With the computer, children can create things that move and interact and animate. So there's new types of things that children can create. And because of that, technology enables us to meet the interests of a wider range of children and give them a wider range of capabilities. So I think we want to be able to help more types of children to create more types of things. And that's one of the things that's possible with new technology. Let me mention one metaphor that I learned from, again, my mentor, Seymour Papert. Seymour said with any new technology, whether it's a computer or a more traditional technology, it's important to have a low floor and a high ceiling, meaning that it's important to be able to start creating things very easily, but to be able to make more and more complex things over time. We also say that it's important to have wide walls, meaning you should be able to use it in many different ways. So we were guided by that when we developed Scratch. We wanted to make it very easy for people to get started, but they should be able to do more complex things over time. And you should be able to use it in many different ways so it would connect with the interests of all different types of children. I think those types of guiding principles are important, whether it's with computational tools or wooden blocks or paintbrushes. We need to provide children with all different types of tools to let them design, create, experiment, and explore.
Muito bom. E como tu sabe, né, Mitchell, aqui no Brasil, por meio do trabalho da rede, não, por meio do trabalho de muitos articuladores, professores que estão aí nas escolas públicas, que muitas vezes não têm acesso, né, a um laboratório de computação ou até mesmo um computador na escola, esse viés da aprendizagem criativa que foca mais na abordagem, né, em como trazer essa abordagem pedagógica para diferentes contextos e realidades, ele é muito forte, né? Por isso que eu falei lá no início também sobre a cozinha da escola, sobre fotografia, enfim. Então, sim, todo mundo ama o Scratch no Brasil, todo mundo gostaria muito de trabalhar, mas às vezes existe essa dificuldade, né, de acesso mesmo por parte dos estudantes e às vezes até por parte dos professores, né? Então é muito importante que o pessoal entenda a aprendizagem criativa nesse contexto com e sem tecnologia, e como a tecnologia vai, sim, sempre poder aprimorar as criações, né, as ideias das crianças. Eu queria só parar um pouquinho para dar só fazer um lembrete aqui. Nossa, yeah. Please go.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think as we use traditional materials, again, people can use all types of materials, but we should still make sure that children have the opportunity to design, create, and make things. That's what's most important. Sometimes in schools, children don't get that opportunity. So for me, what's most important is not exactly what tool is being used, but making sure that children have that opportunity for designing things, making things, creating things where they get to express themselves.
Perfeito. Então, eu vou só lembrar o pessoal de que quem está nos assistindo aqui por meio do Zoom tem a oportunidade de escolher se quer escutar a conversa em português ou em inglês, né? E a forma de a gente definir isso, pessoal, é indo nesse ícone de globo que tem aí embaixo na tela do Zoom, e aí a gente pode selecionar o PT para português e o EN para o inglês, né? Então, e dá para trocar também, né? Se alguém quiser escutar o Mitchell em inglês, enfim, então fiquem à vontade e usem essa ferramenta que eu acho que é bem importante para muita gente, né? Então, seguindo a nossa conversa, né, a gente tem muitos professores aqui hoje, né? Professores, educadores, mas principalmente a gente tem muitos professores de escola aqui hoje, e é grande parte também da nossa comunidade de aprendizagem criativa no Brasil e no resto do mundo, né? E a gente queria te perguntar, Mitchell, como que tu vê o papel do professor na aprendizagem criativa?
I think that educators need to rethink the role that they play. Too often, there's a traditional approach to education where people imagine the educator was just delivering information or delivering instruction to the learner. And oftentimes classrooms were set up with the teacher standing in front, delivering information, delivering instruction to the children as they sat in their desks. And I think to support creative learning, teachers need to play new roles where they're creating an environment where children have the opportunity to design, create, experiment, explore, and express themselves. So there are new roles that the teacher plays. The teacher can play the role of a catalyst by asking questions to spark the imagination of children. The teacher can play the role of a connector to connect children together so they can work with one another and find ways to collaborate in teams, to learn with and from one another. Teachers can play the role of consultant, that when something goes wrong, to help children, understand how to recover from something that's not working well and come up with new approaches. It's not that the teacher needs to know all of the answers, but the teacher needs to support children in that creative learning process, to help them learn how to use their imagination, to create things in the world, to play with it, to experiment, and to constantly, try it again when things go wrong, to make changes and adjustments and refinements and try it again, to be persistent and to try it over till you come up with new ways of doing things and creating things. So I think this role of the teacher, changing from the person delivering information to the one supporting children and exploring and experimenting, is an important part of supporting the creative learning process. Now, it's different than the way some teachers have done things in the past, so it requires some transition. But I think for many teachers, it's much more fulfilling when you get to see the ways that children are learning through their creative explorations. So it does require some changes, but it's something that everyone will benefit if teachers can play that role of supporting the students in designing, creating, experimenting, and exploring.
E é maravilhoso de ouvir isso, né? Assim, e a gente nota, né, que os professores eles se identificam muito com essa abordagem pedagógica, com a aprendizagem criativa. Eles ficam maravilhados, assim, de eu quero fazer isso. E ao mesmo tempo, em razão muitas vezes do sistema escolar em que estão inseridos, ou da política da escola, ou até de estrutura, enfim, o pessoal pensa que não vai rolar, né? Então, assim, os professores eles acabam ficando um pouco ansiosos sobre como dar o primeiro passo, né? Como iniciar com a aprendizagem criativa. Então, já falasse muitas coisas relevantes, assim, mas se tu pudesse dar uma dica, assim, para os professores começarem, né? Com a aprendizagem criativa, o que tu dirias, Mitch?
Well, you're right that sometimes it's challenging within the constraints of a school setting to provide all of the opportunities for creative learning. But you can start by making little changes, by taking a more, allowing children to build on their interests. So think about, instead of all the children doing exactly the same thing, letting children personalize things. The children will learn more and become more motivated when they're working on meaningful projects. So making sure to pay attention to children's interests and building on children's interests is one of the sort of core elements to do it. Trying to give more, arranging children have opportunities to connect with one another so they can learn with and from one another than just doing things totally on their own. So I think there's opportunities to allow children to create things, to follow their interests, to work together with others. You can find ways within the current system to add little pieces of that to everything that you do.
Perfeito. E eu acho que é sempre importante, né, para todas essas, para tudo isso que tu vem nos falando, assim, a gente se perguntar, né, por exemplo, como que eu posso fazer com que os meus estudantes tenham a oportunidade de trabalhar com projetos, né? Como que esses projetos e esse trabalho pode ser significativo para eles? Como que eles podem colaborar nesse projeto e como que eles podem fazer isso de uma forma que seja divertida, com pensar brincando. E isso, acho que conecta toda a nossa conversa de que a aprendizagem criativa ela vai se parecer também diferente em cada escola, em cada sala de aula, muitas vezes, né? Então, dentro daquele contexto, dentro daquela realidade, levando em consideração quem são esses estudantes, né, a personalidade, os interesses de cada um, como que a aprendizagem criativa vai ser aqui nesse nosso universo, né, de comunidade escolar. Bom, seguindo então a nossa conversa, né, e entrando um pouco no... Oh, yes, please go. Pode falar.
Yeah, I do think also just helping to create a new attitude about learning. That too often in schools, things are seen as right or wrong, and children in schools oftentimes feel that they have to give the right answer, and then it's bad if they give the wrong answer. And trying to change it so it's not seen as right or wrong, but the children are always looking to see how can they improve the ways that they're doing things. Then when something goes wrong, it's an opportunity to learn something new. So trying to see, I think teachers trying to set a different attitude in the classroom where children see that if something goes wrong, it's an opportunity where they don't feel like they're doing something where they're a failure, but it's an opportunity to learn something new. I think that new attitude towards learning is also an important part of that creative learning environment. It's part of what we mean by playful. Playful does not just mean laughing and having fun. When I think about a playful approach to learning, I see it as something where children are willing to experiment and try new things. That they're not scared of when something goes wrong, but they're willing to experiment and try new things, because the most creative learning happens only when you're willing to make mistakes, and it's okay to take risks and try new things. So trying to create that environment where children are willing to be and supported to be playful, where they're willing to try new things, because the creative process always requires experimenting, trying new things, taking risks, and being able to adapt when things don't go as you expect.
Só para esclarecer, eu demoro um pouquinho para perguntar porque eu fico com um retorno aqui da tradução, mas também é legal porque a gente vai pausando a conversa e pensando, né? Eu já estou começando a receber algumas perguntas do público que a gente vai começar daqui a pouquinho, depois que a gente terminar essa primeira etapa aqui de perguntas, né? Mas eu acho, Mítia, que tu acabou de responder a primeira pergunta que a gente tinha, que era em relação, que foi a Priscila que fez, eu não sei da onde, né? Mas a Priscila que está participando, ela falou que ela percebe na escola pública, quando ela trabalha com aprendizagem criativa, uma resistência, às vezes, dos próprios alunos em confiarem neles mesmos para produzir algo, né? E ela perguntou, né, como que eles podem aprender a confiar mais neles mesmos e se sentirem mais confiantes com a aprendizagem criativa. Eu acho que tu acabou de responder isso, e eu vou conectar com uma perguntinha que eu li sem querer aqui no chat, que eu também não estou conseguindo prestar muita atenção, mas eu percebi essa pergunta. Como que a gente pode trabalhar ou incentivar que os alunos, acho que mais no sentido de, como que a gente consegue trazer o P da paixão para dentro da sala de aula, né, e conectar essa confiança, esse brincar, esse explorar de diferentes formas e aprender nesse sentido, bem conectado com a paixão, né? Assim, eu acho que isso cai bem para esse contexto de escola pública, né? Em que às vezes os alunos não conseguem fazer tanto essa conexão do conteúdo ou do currículo com os próprios interesses, enfim. E como que tu vê isso, assim, claro que os 4 P's estão conectados, né? Mas principalmente esse P do play, do pensar brincando com a paixão.
Yeah. Well, I do think for me, the P of passion is especially important to make sure that children have the opportunity to build on their interests. Because I think when children have the opportunity to follow their interests, they're willing to work longer and harder and persist in the face of challenges. And they make deeper connections to the ideas. I'm often reminded of an example of one of our early experiments with Scratch. And I went to a group of children who were making games with Scratch. And I saw one of them was making a game, and I was impressed with his game, but he was feeling frustrated because he wanted the game to keep score, and he didn't know how to make it keep score. So I showed him how to introduce a variable in Scratch, where with the variable, you can make it keep score. And he quickly saw how he could do this, and he was so happy, and he reached out his hand and he thanked me and thanked me. And what I thought about was, most children do not thank their teachers for teaching them variables. Too often in school, variables are introduced in a way that children don't connect to. It's just a mathematical idea that they need to learn for school, and they don't care about it. And because of that, they don't make a connection to it, they don't remember it, they don't really get an understanding of the idea. In that case, since the child needed to use variables, he really wanted to understand them, and it was meaningful to him to be able to make use of it. So I think we need to aim for things like that for teaching all different types of things. And when children can connect these new ideas to their interests, that they make deeper connections. So I always think about how can we connect interests with ideas to let children follow their interests, but also connect with important ideas. Now, again, there can be some challenges in the classroom. If you have 30 different children and they have 30 different interests, it can be challenging for a teacher to support all of them. But I think there's some common interests that children have, making games, telling stories. So letting them play out those interests, but then finding ways to connect those interests to important ideas, I think is what the important challenge for all of education.
Muito bom. E o pessoal tem falado bastante aqui no chat, eu acho que é um assunto que a gente não pode deixar de comentar, né? Aqui no Brasil, assim como em outros lugares, a pandemia ela ampliou ainda mais as desigualdades sociais e raciais, né, em diferentes aspectos da nossa vida. Aspecto econômico, no social, na saúde, na educação. E ao mesmo tempo a gente está acompanhando a ampliação desse debate em relação com as manifestações também antirracistas e manifestações a favor da democracia. A aprendizagem criativa ela pode contribuir para esse debate e para a equidade na educação?
I mean, I do think these ideas are very connected to each other. I think in the work that we do, it is so important to make children feel empowered where they feel they can make a difference in the world. And I think if we're looking for equity and justice in the world, we need to have children growing up feeling that they're empowered to make a difference. I do think this goes all the way back to the beginnings of creative learning. My inspiration from Seymour Papert. Seymour grew up in South Africa during the age of apartheid. And I think he was very much influenced by he spent his time as a teenager, as an early adult, trying to bring changes to the society there. He was both a learner, an educator, and an activist. He understood that it was important for all people to grow up, to be able to have their own voice, to express their ideas, to be a full and active participant. And I think in all of his ideas and the ideas that we've built on top of what he did, we've always been saying, how can we provide everyone the opportunity to have their voice so they could be a full participant in society? I think we've also been very inspired by the work of the great Brazilian educator and philosopher Paulo Freire. When I think of Freire's literacy movements, he was not advocating for everyone to learn to write just because it was a skill for getting a job, although of course that's important. He also said, you need to write so that you can express your ideas, so that you can have a voice. You can't be a full citizen, a full participant in society unless you are literate, unless you can write. And I think we're trying to do the same things. Technology can be used in many different ways. Technology can be used in a very oppressive way for people to be able to keep control and to use technology to keep track of people and to keep control of people. We need to make sure that technology is used in a democratic and just way, to make sure that technology is used to empower people to develop their voice, to develop their abilities, so that they can grow up to be full and active contributors, to society.
E falando um pouco sobre, a gente falou um pouquinho do Freire, do Papert, né? E tem uma perguntinha aqui, duas perguntas, na verdade, que eu conectei agora, que também que perguntam um pouco sobre as influências teóricas, né, e de abordagens educacionais da aprendizagem criativa. Então, a Ana Paula, ela perguntou sobre a relação do trabalho do Scratch com as escolas de Reggio Emília. E a professora Rosário Sperotto, da UFPEL, ela disse assim, muitas pessoas têm curiosidade sobre a influência teórica da aprendizagem criativa, né? Ela particularmente trabalha com teorias da aprendizagem. Então, assim, quais são as influências da aprendizagem criativa, né? Como que ela se relaciona com outras teorias e abordagens educacionais?
Yeah. I do think our work on creative learning is building on the work of many other people. So I don't think that these are totally new ideas. Other people have been talking about these ideas, but we need to continue to work to put the ideas into practice. I know that I've been very influenced by educators from early childhood, like Froebel and Montessori, who had materials to let children create with materials to explore the world and experiment and to understand the world. So there's some influences from those early childhood educators like Froebel and Montessori. I've been very influenced by people like John Dewey, who started the progressive education movement. And Dewey, 100 years ago, was saying many of these same ideas about providing children with opportunity to work on real, meaningful projects in the world. I think that now we have a greater range of tools and technology that expand the range of what children can create. So we have a better opportunity to put Dewey's ideas into practice and to put Montessori's and Froebel's ideas into practice. We sometimes think about how can we use our new technologies in the spirit of Froebel and Montessori, but bring them into the 21st century to allow children to explore, experiment, and express themselves in new ways. So I think there's a range of influences, including Papert and Freire, who I mentioned, or Illich, who talked about convivial tools that allow people to explore and experiment. Illich also was talking very much about how tools could be used to oppress or to liberate, to provide new opportunities. So I think there's a wide range of theorists and educators from over the years who have influenced what we do. So we're building on all of those ideas, but we need to continually think how we can take those ideas and put them into practice. That's the hardest part. The ideas are there. I think we know how to support, we know what creative learning is about. We know why it's important, but it's always a challenge to think, how to put it into practice. And each new generation, as society changes, must continue to think, how can we best take these ideas and put them into practice in today's society?
E falando um pouco sobre colocar ideias em prática, o Robson está perguntando o que a gente pode ver no futuro do Scratch. Vai ter mais integração com o mundo físico? O que tem de novidades para a gente?
Well, you mentioned connecting to the physical world. I do think we want to see Scratch as an ever-evolving tool. It's not just a fixed tool. In fact, the newest version of Scratch has what we call extensions. So you keep adding pieces onto Scratch. So you can connect Scratch to motors and sensors so that you can build things in the physical world that interact with what's on the screen. And that's one direction to go. I think we also want to continue to increase the way children can share with Scratch to build in each other's projects and to others' ideas. So I think we always want to continue to expand the tools of what people can create, but also expand the ways that they can share and ways they can collaborate and ways they learn with one another. So I think we're looking at how we can continue to expand each of those 4 Ps to work on new types of projects, to connect with the ever-evolving interests of children, to let them collaborate with peers in new ways, and to explore and experiment in a playful way. So we continue to expand, but what will never change is that Scratch will be designed to let children design and create and experiment and explore, but they'll be able to create new types of things by connecting to the physical world, connecting things on the online world.
Então, a gente tem mais algumas perguntas, acho que a gente tem tempo para mais uma aqui dos participantes, uma ou duas. O Guilherme Alves, que é um parceiro nosso da rede também, ele é um empreendedor aí da aprendizagem criativa, né? Se é o Rodrigues Alves que eu estou lembrando. E ele está perguntando assim, acho que isso é bem conectado com essa experiência que tu tens, Mitchell, de poder ter a oportunidade de observar, de disseminar a aprendizagem criativa ao redor do mundo, né? Não é algo do Brasil, não é algo dos Estados Unidos, é algo que, especialmente com o Scratch, vem se espalhando aí pelo mundo de uma forma muito bonita. Então ele está perguntando assim, como que você vê o crescimento da aprendizagem criativa no Brasil e boas práticas de aprendizagem criativa em outros países? Então, de repente, se tiver algum exemplo assim de projetos, iniciativas que te inspiram, né? Seria legal de a gente ouvir hoje também.
Yeah. Well, I do think a big part, when you asked previously about the future of Scratch, a big part of the future of Scratch is to make sure that it fits in with different cultures around the world, to make sure that Scratch is accessible and available to children from all different places and all different backgrounds. So we have a big effort now to see how can we make sure that Scratch can be used, even if people don't have access to the internet, how they can still use Scratch. If they just have access to mobile phones rather than laptops, how could they access Scratch? And also, how could they bring Scratch and connect it to their culture, to the stories from their childhood, to things that are meaningful to them? So I've always been inspired when I travel around the world and I see children using Scratch to make stories based on the local folklore from the stories of their local culture, or connecting it to different devices. I remember visiting one country where children were connecting Scratch to the physical world to be able to water the plants automatically, to be able to measure the moisture in the soil, and then to pour out water when the plants got dry. So people just using so many creative ways for things that were useful to them, in their local situations. So we want to make sure that children everywhere can connect Scratch to things that are meaningful to them, to connect it to their own culture is a big part of what the future of Scratch to be, where they can create their own images, bring in images from their local stories, and tell their own stories that are meaningful to people around them.
Muito bom, muito inspirador. Mais uma pergunta aqui da audiência, né? Mitchell, quando que você vem para o Brasil?
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can get beyond the current public health crisis and the coronavirus crisis. But then I would love to come back. I've always loved my visits to Brazil and visiting with, especially being hosted by the Creative Learning Network there with Carolina and Leo Bird and, Anne Berger Valente. I have many sort of colleagues and friends in Brazil who have helped introduce me to wonderful places and activities in Brazil. So I've learned so much from my visit, and I always see the creative culture there of people building on the Brazilian music and art in order to make it come alive with Scratch, or to use in other ways as well with, building their own sculptures and their own paintings. I've always been so inspired by what I see children creating during my visits. And hopefully, as the public health situation improves, and I think both of our countries need to do a much better job than they've been doing so that we can hopefully get together and join together and meet sooner rather than later. So I want to thank all of my great friends and colleagues in Brazil who've done such a wonderful job supporting creative learning there. It's been wonderful how the Creative Learning Network has selected fellows from across all of Brazil, from inner city communities to the Amazon villages. And I've had the wonderful opportunity to meet some of the creative learning fellows from all across the country. And I've been so inspired how they've used their local materials to engage children in all different wide variety of creative learning experiences, whether it's making their own dolls out of local materials or making their own little artistic sculptures. There's a wide range of creative activities that I've seen, and I look forward to come back to continue to learn from and learn with our wonderful collaborators in Brazil.
Muito bom. Eu não ia fazer essa pergunta, mas eu vou fazer agora, que você falou tanto em arte, Mitchell. E a gente tem visto tantas manifestações artísticas e conexão com a arte, né, para gerar em expressão, eu acho que de tudo isso que a gente tem vivido e do momento que a gente está passando. Existe algum tipo de arte, algo com o qual tu te conecte, assim, mais intimamente para te inspirar, assim, que te inspire, né, a esse movimento por mudança no mundo?
I don't know if there's any one style of art, but I think I agree that what's important about art is that it provides ways for people to express their ideas and to get their ideas out to the world. One of my great inspirations is from the schools in Italy in the town of Reggio Emilia, where they have some of the best known kindergartens in the world. And I've been very inspired by the work that goes there. And in Reggio Emilia, they talk about the 100 languages of children. And what they mean by the 100 languages of children is that children have so many ways of expressing themselves. And too often, after going through school, people have fewer and fewer languages for expressing themselves. And I think a big part of what we're trying to do, and I think the creative learning movement in Brazil is trying to do, is to keep alive all of those different languages of children, to make sure as people grow up that art is one of those 100 languages and music is one of the languages. We have to keep alive those 100 languages. We like to think the work we're doing with Scratch is another type of language for children to express themselves. So I think what we need to do is to support and nurture those 100 languages of children to make sure that we don't narrow those languages, but nurture the languages so that as children grow up and become adults, they can continue to express themselves through art, through music, through coding, through writing, in all of those different languages, find ways to get their ideas out to the world.
Bom, a gente está chegando no final da entrevista, mas eu queria, antes de encerrar, te perguntar, assim, Mitchell, porque esse livro é uma preciosidade para a gente, né? A primeira edição veio lá de 2017, se eu não estou enganada, e agora em 2020 a gente está conseguindo trazer ele para o público brasileiro, né? Então acho que vai ser muito interessante a gente ver as ações, a experiência que esse livro vai trazer para o Brasil, né, de forma inspiradora, assim como referência para que os próprios brasileiros façam o seu modo de aprendizagem criativa e tenham as suas próprias experiências, enfim. Então eu estou muito curiosa pelas histórias que a gente vai escutar a partir daí, enfim. Mas a gente tem uma curiosidade, assim, né? Se você fosse escrever um livro, né, um novo livro sobre aprendizagem criativa, daqui a 5 anos, vamos dizer assim, né, um médio prazo, que histórias que você gostaria de contar nesse livro?
Well, maybe I'd like to share stories from around the world to see how people are putting these ideas into practice. Again, the book that I wrote is great for putting those ideas out to the world. The hard part is to take those ideas to put them into practice. And I'm so inspired by the way that different educators around the world are taking these ideas and putting them into practice. Of course, our group has the online course, Learning Creative Learning, that Carolina and others have been very involved in supporting, that helps take these ideas and spread them to educators around the world who take the ideas and put them into practice in such creative ways. So I think what we need to do is find more and more ways of helping educators share those ideas through courses like Learning Creative Learning, and in many other ways. I'd love to continue to document all of the ways that educators and children around the world are taking these ideas of projects, passion, peers, and play, and putting them into practice to be able to continue to express their ideas and contribute to the world.
Muito bom. Mitch, eu queria te dizer que a gente teve muitas manifestações aqui durante a conversa no chat. Eu tentei acompanhar um pouco, mas o que eu estou vendo é que o pessoal ou já comprou o livro, ou está comprando, ou já está combinando, assim, como fazer esses encontros aí de leitura. Então, tá bem legal. E todo mundo falando que essa conversa foi muito inspiradora. E eu quero fazer dessas palavras aí do pessoal, sobre o excelente papo que alguém colocou aqui agora, as minhas palavras também, né? Foi uma conversa muito legal. Eu não esperava mediar a conversa essa noite, né? A gente teve, infelizmente, a Tatiana Klix, do Porvir, não pôde fazer a mediação, mas aí eu já entrei que tá tudo bem, a gente conversa, vai ser ótimo. E foi mesmo, né? Então, eu quero te agradecer, né? Muito obrigada pela tua participação, pela tua colaboração, sempre com a rede, né? E pela inspiração que é o teu trabalho, que é a tua história de vida, né? Todas essas histórias, é sempre muito bom te escutar, né? Então, muito obrigada em nome de todos aqui no Brasil. E agora eu vou passar de volta. Lógico, se quiser falar alguma coisa agora no final, fica à vontade.
Well, again, I'd like to thank the organizers of this webinar, the publishers of the book, to the Lemon Foundation, others who are supporting the Creative Learning Network in Brazil. But most importantly, to thank all the educators across Brazil who are taking these ideas and doing such wonderful things of putting them into practice. I know during all of my visits, I learned so much from you, and I look forward to seeing what you and children across Brazil are creating, with these ideas.
Obrigada. Muito, muito obrigada, gente. Agora eu vou passar para a Marina, para ela dar continuidade aqui e fazer o encerramento com alguns recados bem legais aí para nós. Boa noite, pessoal.
Obrigada, Carol. Obrigada, Mitchell. Foi muito inspirador poder te ouvir. Acho que principalmente nesse momento que nós estamos vivendo, num momento tão desafiador para a educação brasileira e para a educação como um todo, nós precisamos dessas doses de inspiração. Então foi muito bom ter você conosco nessa noite. Nós estamos chegando ao fim deste webinário organizado pelo Porvir e a Rede Brasileira de Aprendizagem Criativa, que ainda teve o apoio da Fundação Lehman, Hub Educacional, Faber-Castell e Penso. E quem se interessar pelo livro Jardim de Infância para a Vida Toda, por uma aprendizagem criativa, mão na massa e relevante para todos, pode encontrar o livro para compra no site jardimdeinfanciaparavidatoda.org e com 35% de desconto, hein, pessoal? E frete grátis nas compras realizadas pelo site da editora Grupo A. Então, a gente vai colocar aqui na tela, vai colocar nos comentários também o cupom de desconto, que é Resnick Webinar, que é válido até amanhã. Então, corre para adquirir o seu livro. Nós vamos colocar todas as informações aqui no chat para vocês acompanharem. Muito obrigada a todos que acompanharam, que mandaram suas perguntas. Obrigada, Carol, pela introdução e mediação. Obrigada, Walter, que traduziu a conversa para a gente. E, novamente, muito obrigada, Mitchell, pelo seu tempo, pelas suas reflexões. Com certeza elas foram muito inspiradoras, elas contribuem muito para os educadores brasileiros. Nós acompanhamos um pouco dos comentários aqui no chat, todo mundo muito inspirado com as suas reflexões, com tudo que você trouxe para a gente. E antes de nos despedirmos, nós gostaríamos de avisar também que a gravação desse webinário vai ficar disponível no YouTube do Porvir e da Rebac, e vocês também vão poder acessar a gravação pelo Zoom, vocês vão receber o link no e-mail de vocês para conseguir acessar a gravação. E no Twitter do Porvir nós também subimos alguns destaques da nossa conversa, algumas reflexões da conversa, vocês podem acompanhar. Nós também convidamos vocês a compartilharem reflexões desse momento nas suas redes sociais. E amanhã também vai ter um resumo no Porvir sobre os destaques da conversa. Nós encerramos por aqui e obrigada a todos que nos acompanharam até agora e até a próxima conversa.